Good afternoon, everybody. I've been asked today to give a quick little discussion, if I can, on the concept of race shifting. I guess there's a lot of stuff on the internet right now stemming from a professor who I believe was paid by the federal government to do a report on race shifting. So the first comments I'd like to make is that there is no definitive legal, if I can say it that way, definition of race. Race was set up by the papal bulls to create slavery back in the early times. The concept of what a mixed blood or Métis person is, everybody in the world is a Métis. And that's been proven by current DNA analysis, where all humans on this place of the earth have Neanderthal, Denisovan, possibly Homo erectus, and Homo naledi, and there's other ones, and also some ghost populations and Homo sapiens. So all the races are all related, or all the peoples of the world are all related and are all mixed race. Now, in a governmental structure, for example, Canada has the Charter Rights and Freedoms that identify that there's 3 Aboriginal people in Canada. In the Powley case, there was a definitive of having an Aboriginal ancestor. No timeline on that, by the way. Self-professed to be a Métis, and you had to be a member of a historic Métis community pre-effective control of the British. And where the Powleys were in the Sault Ste. Marie area, my traditional territories, in one of my Aboriginal communities. That was before 1865 or something. I'm not sure. It's irrelevant at this time. When, after 34 years subsequent to the Constitution of 1982, the Daniels case, a decision came down in 2016 that removed the requirement to be a member of a historic Métis community, and it changed Métis to be now Indians or Aboriginals. You can all research those various court cases. So in the case of this supposed, alleged, learned person who teaches, I believe from his website, I could be stand corrected, critical race theory, which is way up in arms about that in the United States, and race shifting, and he produced a report allegedly funded by the federal government on race shifting. I'm very confused of this comment. I did, after his report come out and it was on the website, call his office up, left a phone message. He never contacted me back, which is interesting that he could make a comment funded by the government, making a racial discriminatory comment about a group that he's never contacted, never talked to. So calling someone a name when they don't know you're calling them a name is very disconcerting. It's actually, as far as I'm concerned, a breach of the Charter Rights and Freedoms. It's a discriminatory practice, and it's obviously, if this is all true, that it was funded by the government, a direct attack on some of the Indigenous peoples of Eastern Canada. It's also interesting to note that I may be very well related to this gentleman because the last name is also in my genealogy back to the 1600s. So what is a Eastern Métis population, community? And when does that start? Is there a time limit of history when you change your race? Because I know at the time of the Daniels case in the United States, I was a colonial of one color. Also, at the same time, in another state in the United States, I was First Nation. Then in Canada, I was white. I was Métis, and then I became Indian. So there might be a comment or validation to the comment of race shifting because based on the regulatory authority of the Canadian government, changes your race all the time. What it's very interesting to note that some people that are in regulatory authority can decide what race you are based on pigmentation of the skin. When I was young, I had close to full brown eyes, very dark skin, jet black hair. A little bit of jet black hair here is still remaining. Of course, at 70 years old, most people go gray. But I was diagnosed at a competent hospital in Toronto to have ocular albinism, one of the three albino genetics of Indigenous people. It's well documented that albinoism is one of the oldest group of Homo sapiens in the world. It's prominent in Aboriginal cultures. When you look at the genetics of albinism, there's three distinct combinations to make the genetics. And in North American Aboriginals, it's something like 1 in 3,500 have one of the genes of the three albinism genetic conditions. In non-Aboriginals, it's 1 in 300,000. In fact, off the coast of, I think it's Panama, there's an island. It's well documented on the internet that they have full albino, and they did the genetic and the genetics of the people there, and they have no Spanish admixture or European admixture. They're pure Native Americans, and they're white with even yellow, the red eyes. So the concept of what, quote unquote, race you are is based strictly on observers' biased opinion. So I tried to figure out what this gentleman's mission statement was to make this statement of race shifting and be very condescending in a sense, my opinion, to people who are exercising their rights to be who they believe they are, which is appropriate under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. There has to be a motivation, and the motivation must be from the funding of the federal government and the government's direct attack on any group in Eastern Canada that professed to be Métis. Champlain said there'd be a new race of people. I wasn't talking about out west. My cousins who went out west, Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont, it was Quebec, in Canada originally. Champlain said there'd be a new race of people, the blending of the French and the native people. Well, that's my family. I'm interrelated to all the original first families of Nouvelle-France and also with the native communities from the Mi'kmaq over to the Nipissing Huron. So having someone say who's never even met me or talked to me that I'm a race shifter, I want to be a First Nation person. I don't want to be a First Nation person. They're my brothers and sisters, and most of them are related to me in many community. And they got captured under concentration camp, the reserve system, right? They couldn't leave until 1963. So all these concepts of who you are, who you say what, who you want to be is very difficult to talk about in a short with. So in light of the current situation, I'm formulating a response on this issue to the Human Rights Commission, Indian Affairs, the United Nations, and the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racism and Discrimination, because these comments are totally inappropriate, especially in the society of today where people have the rights to self-determine who they are and say who they are. Now, what I have gleaned from a lot of the comments that are on Twitter and some of the other platforms is people are worried about them getting the money from the government and not having more people come in to try to get the money from the government. We've never asked in our community for money from the government. In fact, we want to apply the laws that are of Canada, and the law of Canada is the Royal Proclamation, which is ingrained into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was ingrained into the Constitution of Canada in 1982. Whether all these things are relevant, but one is, and that was the Royal Proclamation of 1763, I believe it was, where it says, due to the abuse of Aboriginal people, and we've just been identified again in the Daniels case, we're Aboriginal, we're Indians, because of the abuse to them, no lands or resources can be taken from us unless a treaty has been signed with the Crown. Anyone who takes the lands and resources from us without that treaty, it's irrelevant that they just discovered that Métis exist in the 1980s. If anyone has taken the lands and resources from us, they have to be brought to the Crown and be charged with treason. That's a very complex issue. So I know there's Métis out west, Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont, and a lot of the other groups out there were my grandfather's cousins, because I come from the founding families of New France. The first 7 interpreters for Champlain were my ancestors. And the first family of Nouveau France, the Première Famille du Québec, Louis Hébert and Marie Rolette, are also my 9th great grandparents. A long relationship between all the first families and the native communities created the Eastern Métis. The Western Métis, which are legitimate, but they were defeated under military occupation by the British soldiers, and they eventually, the details are relevant but not relevant to my statement. They were defeated and they took script under the Manitoba Act. And so they got their compensation, and some of them got land and a blanket and a rifle and a gold coin or two and a horse. And they got their 200 acres. And all the Métis that are part of the Métis National Council, one way or another, are related to those script Métis. But there was many Métis out west that never got script. And again, there's another issue out west. Under the Manitoba Act, and I stand corrected, John A. Macdonald was supposed to deal with the Eastern Métis, and no prime minister subsequently has dealt with the Eastern Métis. It doesn't mean we don't exist. And the comment that we get all the time, well, the government doesn't recognize you. What does that mean? Well, I talked to, I think it was Diane Kennedy of the Indian Lands Claim. They didn't have any acts, regulations, policies, mandates, or authority to deal with unsurrendered Métis or Aboriginal groups. If you're not surrendered, either under the Gradual Enfranchisement Act, the Gradual Civilization Act, or the Indian Act, or any of the treaties they sign with the ones they put on reserve, like on Treaty 9, they don't recognize you because they don't fund you, and therefore they can't talk to you. And that's the response of the government, because we haven't surrendered, or we don't surrender our Aboriginalness to these political lobbyist groups that are all corporations. All these groups are now, most of them at least, are corporations under the Corporations Act, under not-for-profits. They're political lobbyist groups, service providers of the Crown. So these are the conflicts that people can't, because it's very difficult to understand all the nuances of. So in regards to this comment about race shifting, that's a racial comment to begin with. People don't race shift. They actually are who they are. And when they actually want to come out and say who they are, shouldn't be taken against them to say, oh, well, last month you were quasi-colonial and now you want to reestablish or re-acknowledge your ancestry. Well, there's a problem there, because anyone has the rights to reestablish their inheritance of who they are and where they came from. And most people in Canada, and many of even the First Nations and all these political lobbyist groups that are set up in Canada as service providers of the Crown, they can go to whatever group they want and say, hey, I want to acknowledge, I just found out that I've got Algonquin heritage. My great grandmother was Algonquin. Okay, well, you can identify as Algonquin or Anishinabek or Haudenosaunee or whatever, Athabascan, Salish, whatever you want. You are a mixed blood person. But everybody is a mixed blood person because we're all descended from pre-existing genetic community-based realities. I always say to people who ask me some of these questions, I said, okay, ask someone from England what they are, and they'll say, oh, I'm British. I said, oh, where was your grandfather? Oh, he was from Wales. Oh, so you're Welsh then? No, I'm British. Or I'm Scottish. Or, oh, where were you from? London? Oh, you're Roman, right? England is made up with all these people over the 2,000 years since the Roman invasion of European, Middle East, all the way from Persia and Afghanistan. Romans brought in people to garrison the British Commonwealth or the British islands. So what race are they? And is a British person race? Well, they don't say I'm a British race. What race are you? I'm British, right? What's the race? So this concept of race is really a dead end in intellectual thought or common thought. You are who your ancestors are. And if you're adopted into a community, does that make you not part of a community? If a person who's of native extraction marries someone who's not native from North America, and their children are born, are they not native? Or do they all of a sudden become the European colonial extraction? Why does that have precedence over someone's genetic makeup? Who gives the authority? Well, I can fall back to Carl Linnaeus, who in 1735 wrote the Species Naturale, I can't say the name in Latin, which was the original book on the taxonomy of the human species and all species. And he said there was a number of Homo sapiens. There was one Homo European. Oh, that's the British. That's number one. And then there was in North and South American Homo Americanus. Oh, it's different. Oh, okay. And then he said in his original script is that if a European bred with a Homo Americanus, the children were monstrous. Very important comment here. That was the time of slavery and everything else. So, I guess Métis people are monsters based on that science, that expert of science authority, Carl Linnaeus. Okay, my point is that only 35 to 76, 1735 to 1736, all these people who learned this science, those immigrants, these invaders, these colonists from Britain in 1736, came here. What was their attitude towards Aboriginal people, especially the mixed breed, who were monstrous? This is what they were trained. If they were learned and they went to school and they're the military leaders, we were monsters. So you can see how that anthropogenetic racism was right in there from 1736 onwards, and it was ingrained into all the various components of regulatory control, of the military occupation, of the corporation of the Constitutional Monarchy of Canada. So it's an interesting topic, and I encourage everybody to start looking at these concepts that I've raised, to understand reality that the government puts out isn't necessarily reality. I'm proud of my heritage. I have French, I have Scottish, I have Native ancestry, and I'm proud of all of them. And it doesn't make me any one, lack of the better word, race or genetic profile. Because the other thing is, in the learned of the peopling of North America, South America, they said everybody came from um, the Siberian Peninsula, and their mitochondrial DNA, which you get from your mother's 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 mother, was A, B, C, and D. Well, now they're finding that the Anishinabek people, who oral tradition says they came from the Eastern Sea, have an X chromosome as a mitochondrial DNA. Not the XY of the sex chromosomes, but a mitochondrial X chromosome. They've done some studies of the 9,000-year-old villages, and the one in the ocean and one in the swamp, at the peat swamps down in Florida, and they're basically Caucasian or European with X chromosome, most of them in the DNA from 9,000 years ago. They're also saying that the Kinniqui man from the Columbian River, after many long years, they got permission by the indigenous people there to have the DNA tested, and it was also an X chromosome, which is found in the Levant, in Morocco, and some in Spain. So the story of the Solutrean people coming over with the special technology of the spirit points, populating the eastern part of North America, i.e. Anishinaabe stories we come from the Eastern Sea. They have found that the Anishinaabe people, the Algonquins for one, and the Ojibways, have a high incidence of female mitochondrial DNA of X, and that goes all the way out in lower denominations as you look at the populations to the Hopi and Navajo and some of the Athabascan people. So this whole idea of racial purity, racial this, racial that, is all, I don't want to say inappropriate, it's just not real, right? People are who their community says they are. And if you are born into a community, adopted in a community, and they accept you, then you're part of that community. Yeah, so I don't know what more to say on this. Everybody should really know where they came from so they can have confidence in who they are, and be happy with who they are, and don't feel that they're any different than anyone else, because we all have admixtures of every race of humanity that they found so far, all in their bloodstreams, from all over the world. We're all related, and race is just a total fallacy based on the need for slaves to do the work of the rich people back in the 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and even into the 19th century. I hope this is helpful for people who are uncomfortable about how they acknowledge of who they are, or acceptance coming into our nation. If we accept you into the nation, even without any indigenous genetics, you're still cousins. So why would we be prejudiced against someone who is, in reality, a cousin? Because we're all cousins across this face of the world. Now, where this issue of Aboriginal rights, what you get, these are things that the government gives you because they've conquered you. Your indigenous rights are something different than what people believe to be indigenous rights. The indigenous rights are dictated now under international law, under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and there's a whole bunch of Roma Convention and a whole bunch of other ones before them. Canada's validated the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People with the Canada Act one. So there's a lot of new grounds in constitutional, international law, rights-based law, human rights-based law, um, that are all going to be a mixture in the future. So I'll go right back to the beginning of the statement. This gentleman was paid, as far as I believe, by the federal government to make this document up about race shifting because he's an expert. Well, you know what they say about experts? They're old drips. And that's good humor. Because if someone is going to make a comment about me or my community and he's never met me, seen me, interviewed me, or didn't return my emails or telephone call after I found out what he did, that I think states everything about this process of this document about race shifting. It's all compost. I hope you're having a good day, and I hope this has some relevance to the reality of today. Take care.